really what we do is not hugely important. It's how we do it.
Right.
But you know, we're just these fragile little beings jumping around on the earth. I don't know.
It's true. So how does someone like that?
Nashville loves to celebrate its legends, but what they don't tell you is how many of those same legends were secretly punished, banned, and erased by the very industry that made them famous. Country music's biggest names have faced brutal rejection for speaking out, and many were simply pushed aside for not playing by Nashville's rules. What did they do that made Nashville turn against them so viciously? Stick to the end as we reveal the shocking truth behind country music's darkest secrets, and number 7 is a real shocker. Number 15, Hank Williams Sr. Hank Williams was one of the greatest voices country music ever had, but Nashville completely turned on him when he was at his lowest point. Hank dealt with horrible back pain his entire life, and he tried to cope with alcohol and pills because the pain just wouldn't stop. The addiction grew worse and worse, but Nashville didn't care about helping him at all. In 1952, the Grand Ole Opry actually fired their biggest star and banned him from ever performing there again. They said he was unreliable and missed too many shows, but nobody bothered to ask why or offer him any real help or treatment. So, Hank was left completely alone, abandoned by the same industry that was making millions off his music. He kept trying to perform in small towns here and there, kept drinking, kept suffering through the pain with nobody by his side. On New Year's Day in 1953, Hank Williams died in the backseat of a car at just 29 years old. He died alone, still banned from the Opry, still unwanted by the Nashville establishment that had once celebrated him. Even after he was gone, Nashville stayed quiet about him for decades. They didn't celebrate his genius or honor what he'd done for country music. They just acted like he was an embarrassing problem they wanted everyone to forget. Hank Williams wrote songs that literally changed country music forever. But when he needed compassion and support, Nashville chose to erase him instead. They fired him, banned him, and let him die in complete exile. That's how severely Nashville punished Hank Williams. But if you think Hank's story was dark, wait until you hear what happened to the next artist, because his punishment didn't just end his career, it landed him behind bars and turned him into someone Nashville would never forgive. Number 14, Johnny Paycheck. Johnny Paycheck didn't just get kicked out of Nashville, he went to prison and never really came back from it. Johnny was a talented singer with a rebellious streak, and Nashville tolerated him for a while because he had hits. But in 1985, everything fell apart when Johnny got into a bar fight in Ohio that turned violent. He shot a man during the confrontation, and suddenly his problems went way beyond just being difficult to work with. Johnny was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to prison. He served nearly 2 years behind bars, and while he was locked up, Nashville completely moved on without him. Radio stations stopped playing his music, labels dropped him, and the industry basically acted like he'd never existed. When Johnny finally got out of prison in the late 80s, he tried to rebuild his career, but Nashville wanted nothing to do with him anymore. The shooting had made him radioactive in their eyes, someone too dangerous and unpredictable to support or promote. He kept performing at small venues and honky-tonks where fans still remembered him, but the big opportunities never came back. Nashville never forgave him for what happened, never gave him a real second chance to prove he'd changed. Johnny Paycheck spent his final years playing dive bars and struggling financially, completely shut out from the industry that once celebrated him. He died in 2003, still carrying the weight of that one violent night that cost him everything. Nashville didn't just punish Johnny Paycheck, they erased him completely and made sure he stayed erased until the very end. Number 13, Billy Joe Shaver. Billy Joe Shaver was one of the most gifted songwriters in country music history, but Nashville treated him like he was too dangerous to touch. Billy Joe wrote incredible songs that other artists turned into hits, but when he tried to make it as a performer himself, the labels kept turning him down. They thought he was too rough, too unpredictable, too much trouble to deal with. His reputation got even worse in 2005 when he shot a man outside a bar in Texas. Billy Joe claimed it was self-defense, and a jury actually agreed with him, finding him not guilty. But Nashville didn't care about the verdict. The damage was already done. After that shooting incident, the industry basically blacklisted him. Radio stations wouldn't play his records, major labels wouldn't sign him, and the Grand Ole Opry never invited him to become a member, despite his massive contributions to country music. Billy Joe kept writing brilliant songs and performing for small but devoted crowds who understood his genius. Other artists kept recording his material and making money from it, but he never got the recognition or support he deserved from Nashville's power structure. The industry was simply afraid of him. They saw him as violent and unstable, someone who could create bad publicity or cause problems. So, they kept their distance and let his talent go to waste for decades. It wasn't until late in his life that Billie Joe finally started getting some of the respect he'd earned. By then, he'd spent most of his career struggling in obscurity, while Nashville celebrated far less talented artists. Billie Joe Shaver died in 2020, finally recognized but never truly embraced by the industry that should have lifted him up from the beginning.
Number 12. David Allan Coe.
David Allan Coe was too wild, too explicit, and too controversial for Nashville to ever accept, so they shut him out completely. David made music that pushed every boundary Nashville had. He recorded underground albums with extremely offensive content that the mainstream industry wanted nothing to do with. His image was rough and intimidating, covered in tattoos and leather, looking more like an outlaw biker than a country singer. Nashville's response was total rejection. Radio stations refused to play his songs. The Grand Ole Opry never invited him to perform, and he was shut out of every major award show year after year. The Country Music Association acted like he didn't even exist. Even though David wrote hits for other artists and had a dedicated fan base, the industry kept him at arm's length. They saw him as too dangerous for their carefully controlled image of what country music should be. David leaned into the rejection and built his career outside the system entirely. He toured constantly, sold albums independently, and cultivated a cult following of FOMAs who loved exactly what Nashville hated about him. But the cost was real. He never got the recognition, the awards, or the platform that his talent deserved. Nashville made sure he stayed on the margins, treated like an embarrassment rather than an innovator. David Allan Coe spent his entire career fighting against Nashville's rules and paid the price with permanent exile from the establishment. They never forgave him for refusing to play by their rules or tone down his image. He proved you could survive without Nashville's approval, but you'd never thrive within their system if you challenged them too directly. Number 11. The Dixie Chicks. The Dixie Chicks were at the absolute peak of country music success when they said one sentence that destroyed everything they'd built. In 2003, during a concert in London, lead singer Natalie Maines told the crowd they were ashamed the president was from Texas. She was referring to George W. Bush and the upcoming Iraq War. That single comment triggered the most organized and vicious backlash in modern country music history. Country radio stations across America immediately banned their music. Some stations even organized public events where fans could bring Dixie Chicks CDs to be crushed by bulldozers. Nashville turned on them completely. The Country Music Association distanced itself from the group, former fans sent death threats, and conservative talk shows painted them as traitors. Their concerts were protested, their album sales collapsed, and the entire country music establishment acted like they'd committed an unforgivable sin. The punishment was swift, coordinated, and absolutely brutal. Radio programmers received calls demanding the Dixie Chicks be removed from playlists permanently. Other country artists either stayed silent or publicly criticized them to protect their own careers. The Dixie Chicks tried to push forward. They won multiple Grammy Awards and released critically acclaimed albums, but country radio never forgave them. They were permanently exiled from the format that had made them superstars. They eventually changed their name to the Chicks and found success in other genres, but Nashville made sure they understood the message clearly. Political dissent would not be tolerated, and punishment would be complete and permanent. The Dixie Chicks experienced something most country artists only feared: total industry destruction for speaking their minds. Number 10. Waylon Jennings. Waylon Jennings didn't just break Nashville's rules. He declared war on the entire system and fought them for years. In the early 70s, Nashville controlled everything about an artist's career. They picked your songs, chose your musicians, decided your sound, and took most of the profits. Waylon looked at that system and said absolutely not. He demanded creative control over his music, wanted to use his own band, and refused to record the polished Nashville sound they were pushing. The industry fought back hard, because if Waylon succeeded, other artists might start demanding the same freedom. Nashville punished him by reducing his radio airplay, limiting his promotional support, and making sure he didn't win awards he clearly deserved. They labeled him difficult and uncooperative, hoping other artists would see what happened when you challenged the system. But Waylon didn't back down. He kept fighting, and eventually forced RCA Records to give him the creative control he demanded. That victory helped launch the entire outlaw country movement and change Nashville forever. Still, the punishment continued for years. Radio stations played him less than his talent deserved, award shows overlooked him repeatedly, and industry executives badmouthed him behind closed doors as someone who couldn't be trusted or controlled. Waylon survived because he built his own audience outside of Nashville's approval. He toured constantly, made music his way, and proved that artists didn't need the industry's permission to succeed. By the time Nashville finally accepted him, Waylon had already won the war, but the battle cost him years of proper recognition and opportunities that should have been his from the start. Nashville never forgot that Waylon challenged their power, and they made sure he paid for it every step of the way. But Waylon had a partner in that rebellion, his best friend Willie Nelson, who Nashville had already tried to erase years before. Number 9, Willie Nelson. Willie Nelson was told he had no future in country music, so Nashville quietly erased him and expected him to disappear forever. In the late 60s, Willie was writing hit songs for other artists but couldn't get anyone interested in recording him as a performer. Nashville producers said his voice was too strange, his phrasing was too weird, and his look didn't fit what country stars were supposed to be. Record labels dropped him repeatedly. Radio stations wouldn't play his records. The industry basically told him he was unmarketable and should stick to writing songs for real stars to sing. So, Willie left Nashville entirely. He moved to Texas, grew his hair long, and started making music exactly the way he wanted. He built his career outside the system that had rejected him, playing for hippies and outcasts who didn't care what Nashville thought. Then, something incredible happened. Willie became massive. His album Red-Headed Stranger became one of the biggest country records ever made, and suddenly everyone wanted a piece of him. But here's the thing, Nashville never apologized for trying to erase him. They just pretended they'd supported him all along and started claiming credit for his success. Willie proved that Nashville's gatekeepers were completely wrong about what audiences wanted. He showed that artists could succeed without their approval or their narrow definition of what country music should sound like. The industry tried to bury Willie Nelson early in his career, declared him unmarketable and unwanted. But he survived their rejection and built something so big they couldn't ignore it anymore. Nashville didn't destroy Willie, but they definitely tried, and they would have succeeded if he'd listened to them instead of trusting himself. Number 8, George Jones. George Jones had one of the greatest voices in country music history, but Nashville slowly distanced themselves from him as his personal life fell apart. George struggled with severe alcohol addiction for decades, and it affected everything. He missed concerts, failed to show up for recording sessions, and became so unreliable that promoters nicknamed him No-Show Jones. The stories became legendary, like the time he drove his lawnmower to a bar because his wife hid his car keys. Nashville didn't fire George outright, like they did with Hank Williams, but they gradually pulled away from him. Radio play decreased, award nominations became less frequent, and industry support quietly dried up during his worst years. The establishment kept him at a distance because addiction made him unpredictable and embarrassing. They'd rather promote stable artists who showed up on time and didn't create problems, even if those artists had half the talent George possessed. George kept recording and performing through all of it, but he wasn't getting the recognition his incredible voice deserved. The industry treated him like a liability rather than a legend. It wasn't until George finally got sober in the 80s that Nashville welcomed him back. Suddenly, he was winning awards again, getting radio play, and being celebrated as the greatest country singer alive. But here's the reality. Nashville abandoned George Jones when he needed support the most. They waited until he fixed himself before they'd embrace him again, rather than helping him through his darkest times. George eventually reclaimed his legacy, but only after years of being marginalized by an industry that valued reliability over raw talent. The next artist faced rejection for completely different reasons, because being openly lesbian in country music meant Nashville would push you out entirely, and that's exactly what happened to K.D. Lang.
Number 7, K.D. Long.
K.D. Lang had the voice, the talent, and the hits, but Nashville pushed her out because she refused to hide who she was. In the early 90s, she was making waves in country music with her incredible vocal range and unique style. She won awards, earned critical praise, and seemed destined for major stardom in the genre. Then she came out publicly as a lesbian, and everything changed overnight. Country radio stations started dropping her songs from their playlists. The format that had celebrated her talent suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. Program directors claimed her music didn't fit anymore, but everyone knew the real reason. Nashville's conservative fan base and industry gatekeepers weren't ready for an openly gay artist, so they simply erased her from country music. Award show invitations stopped coming, collaborations dried up, and the establishment made it clear she wasn't welcome anymore. KD didn't fight to stay where she wasn't wanted. She moved into pop and adult contemporary music, where audiences embraced her completely. She won Grammy Awards, sold millions of records, and built a successful career far away from Nashville's judgment. K.D. Lang proved you could have all the talent in the world, but if you didn't fit Nashville's narrow definition of acceptability, they'd push you out without hesitation. She became another example of Nashville choosing image and conformity over pure artistic ability. The industry lost an incredible talent because they cared more about maintaining their conservative brand than celebrating great music. K.D.'s Lang found success and respect elsewhere, but Nashville made sure she understood she'd never truly belong in country music. Another woman faced similar treatment, though her crime was different. Tanya Tucker was punished simply for living her life honestly and refusing to apologize for it.
Number 6. Tanya Tucker.
Tanya Tucker was a child star who grew into a woman Nashville couldn't control, so they punished her for refusing to play by their rules. Tanya started recording hits when she was just 13 years old, and by her 20s she was a major star. But she also lived her life loudly and honestly, dating who she wanted, partying when she felt like it, and refusing to pretend she was something she wasn't. Nashville didn't like that one bit. They expected their female stars to be wholesome and well-behaved, especially someone who had started as a teenage sensation. When Tanya kept being herself instead, the industry turned judgmental. Radio stations gave her less airplay than her talent deserved. Award shows overlooked her year after year, despite her incredible vocals and hit records. The Country Music Association treated her like she wasn't respectable enough for their prestigious honors. Industry executives and media outlets constantly criticized her personal life, her relationships, and her choices. They focused more on judging her behavior than celebrating her music, as if being an independent woman was somehow worse than being a mediocre artist who followed all the rules. Tanya kept recording and performing through all of it, but she was marginalized during what should have been her absolute prime years. Nashville made sure everyone knew she wasn't their ideal of what a country music lady should be. It took decades before the industry finally gave Tanya Tucker proper recognition. In 2019, at age 60, she won 2 Grammy Awards and finally got some of the respect she deserved all along. But by then, she'd already spent most of her career being punished for nothing more than being honest about who she was. Next was Kris Kristofferson, a brilliant songwriter whose political views and literary lyrics made Nashville deeply uncomfortable. Number 5. Kris Kristofferson. Kris Kristofferson was too smart, too political, and too complex for Nashville to ever fully embrace, so they kept him at a careful distance his entire career. Kris was a Rhodes Scholar who gave up a military career to write songs in Nashville. His lyrics were poetic and intellectual, in ways that made the industry uncomfortable. He wrote about deeper themes than typical country songs, and that made him feel dangerous to the establishment. Then he started speaking out politically, supporting causes and candidates that conservative Nashville wanted nothing to do with. He criticized wars, defended progressive positions, and refused to stay quiet about issues he cared about. Nashville's response was subtle but effective. They gave him minimal promotional support, limited his radio airplay, and made sure he never became as big as his talent deserved. Awards and recognition came slowly if they came at all. The industry treated Kris with respect because they couldn't deny his songwriting genius, but they never really welcomed him into the inner circle. He was always kept at arm's length, someone they acknowledged but never fully celebrated. Kris didn't seem to care much about Nashville's approval. He kept writing brilliant songs, acting in movies, and supporting the causes he believed in, regardless of industry pressure. But the cost was clear. Other artists with far less talent got more support, more airplay, and more opportunities simply because they didn't make Nashville uncomfortable the way Kris did. Kris Kristofferson outlasted the rejection and proved his worth over decades, but the industry never stopped keeping their distance. His influence on country music was undeniable, but Nashville made sure he worked harder for recognition than he ever should have needed to. Another artist faced similar treatment for different reasons. Linda Ronstadt was simply too successful and too free to fit Nashville's need for control. Number 4. Linda Ronstadt. Linda Ronstadt was too big, too successful, and way too independent for Nashville to handle, so they quietly excluded her from their club. Linda had massive hits with country songs in the 70s, selling millions of records and dominating the charts. But she refused to be labeled as just a country artist. She sang rock, pop, mariachi, opera, whatever she wanted, and Nashville hated that freedom. The industry wanted artists who stayed in their lane and played by the rules. Linda did the opposite. She moved between genres freely, collaborated with whoever interested her, and built a career that was way bigger than country music alone. Nashville's response was subtle institutional resistance. They didn't openly attack her, but they didn't fully embrace her either. Country radio gave her less support than her sales deserved. Award shows nominated her occasionally, but never made her feel truly welcome. The Country Music Association treated Linda like an outsider who happened to record country songs sometimes, rather than celebrating her as one of the format's biggest stars. They seemed uncomfortable with how successful she was without needing their approval. Linda didn't fight for Nashville's acceptance because she didn't need it. Her career thrived across multiple genres, she won Grammy Awards in different categories, and she became one of the best-selling artists of her generation. But Nashville made their position clear through quiet exclusion. They never fully claimed her as one of their own, even though her country recordings were phenomenal and commercially huge. Linda Ronstadt proved you could succeed massively without Nashville's blessing, but the industry made sure she understood she'd never be considered a true member of their establishment. The next artist faced barriers that were even more fundamental, because he broke country music's color line, but never stopped feeling like an outsider. Number 3. Charley Pride. Charley Pride became country music's first black superstar, but Nashville treated him like a special exception rather than truly accepting him as an equal. Charley had an incredible voice and became hugely successful in the late 60s and 70s, racking up dozens of #1 hits. But he faced racial barriers every single step of the way that white artists never had to deal with. Nashville marketed Charley carefully, often keeping his face off early album covers, so radio stations wouldn't know he was black before they started playing his songs. The industry was terrified that country fans wouldn't accept a black artist, so they treated him like a risky experiment. Even as Charley became massively successful, he remained isolated within the industry. He was the only black face at industry events, award shows, and backstage at the Grand Ole Opry. Nashville celebrated him as proof they weren't racist, but they never opened doors for other black artists to follow. The industry gave Charley limited visibility compared to white stars with similar success levels. He didn't get the same promotional support, the same magazine covers, or the same cultural celebration that his achievements deserved. Charley was honored late in his career, inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2000, but for decades he existed in Nashville as a token rather than a trailblazer they genuinely supported. He handled the isolation with grace and dignity, but the reality was clear. Nashville accepted Charley Pride as an exception to their unspoken rule that country music was a white space, but they never truly included him or made room for others like him. Decades later, country music still struggles with diversity, proving that Charley's success never changed Nashville's fundamental comfort zone. A modern artist would face similar quiet rejection, proving Nashville's tactics evolved, but their exclusionary instincts remained the same.
Number 2. Kacey Musgraves.
Kacey Musgraves proved that Nashville's rejection tactics evolved over time, becoming quieter but just as effective at pushing out artists who challenged their comfort zone. Kacey won critical acclaim and Grammy Awards for albums that were brilliant and honest, but Nashville country radio barely played her music. She sang about acceptance, LGBTQ rights, and marijuana use, topics that made conservative country gatekeepers deeply uncomfortable. The punishment wasn't loud or dramatic like what happened to the Dixie Chicks. Instead, Nashville used silent exclusion. Radio programmers just quietly declined to add her songs to playlists, claiming they didn't fit the format even though musically they absolutely did. Award shows gave Kacey some recognition, but country radio, the real power in Nashville, froze her out almost completely. Her albums won Album of the Year at the Grammys, but couldn't get consistent airplay on country stations. The Country Music Association seemed embarrassed by her progressive views and boundary-pushing lyrics. They'd nominate her occasionally, but never fully embraced her the way they did safer, more conventional artists. Kacey didn't fight the rejection, she just built her career outside Nashville's system. She found massive audiences at festivals, on streaming platforms, and among fans who loved exactly what country radio refused to play. She proved you could win Grammys, sell out arenas, and be critically celebrated, while Nashville country radio pretended you barely existed. The industry's quiet freeze-out didn't destroy her career, but it limited her reach within the format she'd grown up loving. Kacey Musgraves became a modern example of how Nashville punishes artists who challenge their conservative worldview, just with silence instead of spectacle. But not every rejection lasted forever. Number 1. Garth Brooks. Garth Brooks was country music's biggest superstar when he decided to take a creative risk that temporarily turned Nashville against him. In 1999, Garth created an alter ego named Chris Gaines, a fictional rock star with a completely different look and sound. He released an album as this character, wore a wig, and fully committed to the concept. Nashville and country fans absolutely hated it. They felt betrayed that their biggest star was abandoning country music for a weird rock experiment. Radio stations refused to play the Chris Gaines album, critics mocked him relentlessly, and the industry distanced themselves from what they saw as a massive mistake. The backlash was intense, but notably different from what other artists faced. Garth wasn't banned or blacklisted permanently, he was just temporarily punished for confusing and disappointing his fan base. When the Chris Gaines project flopped commercially, Garth simply returned to making traditional country music, and Nashville welcomed him back almost immediately. His loyal fans forgave him, radio stations started playing his new country songs again, and within a few years, it was like the whole thing never happened. Garth's punishment was real, but brief, because he had something most rejected artists didn't: an absolutely massive and devoted fan base that Nashville couldn't afford to ignore. He was too big to exile permanently. His experience showed that Nashville's rejection wasn't always fatal. If you were commercially powerful enough and willing to return to what they wanted, you could recover from creative risks that would have destroyed smaller artists permanently. Garth Brooks faced the least lasting damage of anyone on this list, proving that in Nashville, your level of commercial success often determined whether rejection was temporary or permanent. These 15 stories reveal how Nashville has always punished artists who challenge their control, threaten their image, or simply refuse to conform. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.